Well, yeah, because we had to be with the kids and then we had to clean up after the kids. Saturday's great, guys. Usually Lexi would be here on time as a faithful servant, but she plays worship on Sundays when it's the first Sunday of the month downstairs.
You like this open day?
Yes, please.
If you can.
Depends on how skilled you are at doorstop insertion.
I know. Oh, that's right.
This is just the word doorstop. It wasn't so bad until we got that once force got nice.
Yeah.
That was it. It was done for.
Yeah. How did last night go?
It's pretty good.
Last
It's
night?
interesting. The Christmas party had like close to 40 kids.
Yeah.
There's like, wow. So yeah, but it was still a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for sending me that timeline.
Oh yeah.
That'd be awesome.
It's a pretty good time. I meant to put the link in for my source.
Yeah.
I'll have to send that to you at some point too. It's got the book on it.
I just bought the largest corkboard this side of the Mississippi River, so it's gonna go on my
Giant corkboard.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then you can like refine it as you want to go. I was thinking destruction of Rome 70 AD would be one little line to add to it, but it's Paul's stuff. You're doing Paul.
Yeah, I was trying to stick to Paul's line. I did put the Emperor's bottom.
Yeah, you know, Paul ends in about 67, 68. He gets
60. Yes, no more. We're not sure because it doesn't mention his death. Precisely, it mentions him being arrested.
Yeah.
So we know his arrest was in 66, and we know he was killed.
Yeah.
While he was under that
And
arrest.
2 Timothy, he's going on, but it's probably dead. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. See you guys.
If you were up here, they would have had somewhere to go. They had to hang out with Dick downstairs.
I don't think that sounds like a bad thing.
There's leftover pizza for anyone who's hungry and likes cold pizza. Wow. Okay. A lot of excited kids on that one. I'll hang out and get them for next time. Jean loves cold pizza.
Can't really like cold pizza. I can see.
It is her favorite thing.
Both.
You took more of it. Probably gotta use those A attacks more. Get right up to him, run at him, and hit him with those A attacks. It's your bread and butter. A button is green, by the way.
B button is red.
There it is. See? Isn't that a great attack? And the running one. Love the running one. Alright, go on, jump in. Of course. Every time you don't check the channel, it's not on the right channel.
It's not like we have two anymore, so how does that even happen?
People just run their thumb along the dial when they're touching it.
What should I say? Like,
I think they have like tactile obsession.
you turn it off and turn it back on?
Oh, you really are a tech guy.
Hey.
What the? Wait, I'm gonna switch it over. I apologize. Let's see if there's a slot. Wait, it doesn't work. Yeah, it's a slot.
Really?
It's not working in 3 right now. We'll see if that's consistent later on. Ooh, looks like they
Classic. Navigate.
Unless it's last night, then it's where Kirby's last forever.
I can't believe he beat Joe in the end.
Oh man, that was just like so.
Poor Joe was
unfair.
like disheartened.
Well, because Joe is actually really good on normal grounds.
There can only be one.
Ooh, that was beautiful.
Zelda's back air, if it hits somebody when they're in midair, it's one of the best spikes in the game.
Really?
Yeah, it just shoots them straight down.
So back air.
Yeah, if you hit like the upper half of the body, it usually just
No.
knocks them down. Oh,
You got sandwiched between me and a bomb that time. It wasn't just me.
you two staying safe, huh? This could be a four-way
Seriously?
sudden death.
Seriously? I had
Yeah.
you all beat.
Alright, you guys got 30 seconds before the bombs start coming.
3 seconds left.
He said 30. Link says I have bombs now.
No. I died. Take cover. That didn't work.
Backwards and slingshot. Oh, that was beautiful. That was beautiful.
Yeah, let's see if that.
Did anybody actually get any kills that round?
No, until the sudden death.
No, but it said that they just died to bombs.
I killed him, but it was off a bomb,
Yeah.
so it didn't count for my kill.
So nobody actually got any kills that
Because I hit him and then he went into a bomb, so the bomb like stole my kill.
Yeah.
Alright guys, 2 halves of a donut and a donut hole.
Any two halves, you can mix and match. That's totally acceptable. Go for
That
it.
makes the donut hole.
This way,
Yeah.
you can
So if I get 2
have
halves
two
and a donut
kinds
hole.
of donuts.
You get a full donut. You get the complete edition of the donut.
It is complete.
Zelda is my favorite character, but I'll this, I think I'm better at Zelda than anyone else.
I know how to change
She
Oh yes, Mr. Game watches Best Live.
No, I'm more the high.
Will you? Will you? Oh, yours is better.
Mine's fine.
the trick to Game & Watch is the insta-killer hammer.
The down B or the down smash?
The side B.
Oh, but that's like a random.
Yeah, but every time you hit somebody, it stays up for an extra like 2 seconds.
It stays out?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, so you can hit somebody, and then I see people just run right into it, trying to punish it, and they get hit by it, and it stays up even longer, so the third person thinks, well now for sure it's over, and then they try and run it, and then they get hit by it.
Oh, whatever, you two.
Oh.
Yours has better reach. Alright, we need to start killing Zelda. Play, stay out of the way.
Whoa. Yay! He wins. My spot. No, my spot. Mine.
Turtle. Oh, what? They're both playing range.
No, my spot. Look down here.
She has a projectile as Zelda. She's a fireball. Oh, what? I walked right into that. Goodbye, Link. Hey, Zelda's in the lead. We need to get Zelda. Oh, brutal. You just flung bacon back at me. Alright, there we go.
Now the score is 7.
Well, no, I still have more health on me, so you gotta get hurt a little bit. Ah, where'd that come from? Oh, nice.
Why'd you run into it?
Oh, man.
Angel,
What?
you got your prize.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, I got it.
How's it fun?
Oh! Now it's a fair game.
Not yet.
You're welcome to try.
Well, it's not in there full.
I have Well, fuck yeah, I'm on the offensive. Oh, you're back. What do you want me to do? Alright. Apparently I'm supposed to lose now.
Kill him.
When your daughter's crying, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks.
She just wanted you to just get up off the couch.
Well, that's obvious.
I'm gonna kill him.
Oh, well, now you made her cry again.
She needs sarcasm.
You had a really rough time.
I was about to say, that's gonna be a tough one.
I got your tea and oatmeal beer.
Thank you. I didn't actually know you left the room.
You know, I was just crying.
Don't hit me again.
Well, there. Did you say you were leaving your room?
Or you
I said I'll be right back.
Where was I?
He was in the zone.
I was there and then
I was right next to you and I said I'll be right back.
I said thank you because what I noticed was. Stop that.
no, he's gonna fight back.
I noticed keys being set down.
No, you should.
Wait, how was I alive this whole time? How did you guys not kill me?
Because he hit me.
Oh, there we go.
Now he's dead.
Yeah.
There's a lot over.
I got you, Daniel.
That's why she was crying, Andrew. You didn't give her a view of the game.
I tried, but the pizza box was in the way.
That's not good enough.
No, I don't want to die.
You should have up and B. It's your recovery.
She tried side B.
Yeah, it did. It was fun. Hey, at least I got a second. Oh yeah, back. Yeah. Oh yeah, you died first.
Gotta hit start instead of.
When you sing, or the one they used to
Oh,
blow up
when
balloons? Andrew?
Where's my controller?
Good old blueberry DK.
Blueberry?
Ooh, like a
down.
blueberry.
Oh, come on.
He does have a purple tie though, which I think is a slight detractor from his fullness.
Donkey Kong.
On a monkey?
Coolness is eternal.
A blue monkey.
Ooh, careful, Jane.
I know.
I know. Okay.
There we go, just really strong.
There
He's on.
Yeah, wait, you went to the wrong side though.
Sorry, Kevin.
Look at that.
Distracted.
He's on. Yeah, DK, take it over. Oh, I don't wanna get mad.
You know, you're good.
There
But I
you
don't
go.
wanna get in that.
There's your stomach was right, 'cause I got you tea and oatmeal. And you would think that-
Ah, whoever that is.
Quite a bit less.
Zelda.
Ah. Whoa, exploding.
I don't think it's real country.
My spot.
My spot.
Hi, Bumblebee.
My spot.
Bumblebee too?
Is that you?
My spot.
Over here. Here, come on, that's fine. Little whaler.
My spot.
My spot?
She doesn't actually play the game, she camps and then defends herself if you come at her.
Nice.
Hey man, survival mode works.
In stock, yeah. It's a very good strategy. But if you keep talking about the fact that you're camping, it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to be camping, you're supposed to be hiding.
Yes, wrong way.
Yeah.
You're trying to lose mind share, not gain it.
My spot.
It's not working.
Taking it back.
That's a worthy song. Just take on Andrew whatever you want. Which is what? Yep. Who was that earlier then? I can't remember. Yep. No, seriously, the correlation between waking up early and watching the rest of the day. It's real correlation. General Sugar? Alright, we should probably get started. I think my oatmeal is good. Like, This is supposed to be you and the Samus. So it's the future. Samus is pretty such
Except for the view.
yeah, not terrible. It's stuck though, right? You have cover.
Daniel, call it.
I mean, I win because I have more lives.
So if you can kill him once and then we'll call it, then you can say it's back. Get actually good back. There you go. There is a move where you can suck them in and then walk off instead of the last second. Walk out and walk. Better? No. You know, is it the bomb tree?
Combination of bomb training. Yeah, but you know, the one that's like the big, the, no, the 3D stage is like the big challenge, like the 3 floating platforms.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And Samus can go from the bottom left corner to the upper right.
I didn't get away in time.
Yeah, you can't just like go to the right. You have to make it go. Yummy! Think we're gonna call it there. What do you think, Andrew? You think he has a chance?
I think he's got a great.
Especially with the running away tactic?
Yeah, I just see that working
Quite well. Really soon, too. It's paying off huge dividends.
Actually, one time from my back.
Because we went to Andrew is on point. No, it's actually worse than that. Oh no, I get that. I get that. I think it's a snapshot.
Yeah, they're both snap. But one about
The one's a fold, one's not.
yeah.
I thought it was fold and or you smash.
Alright, time to feel captain.
writing.
That's not tilted, that's like.
We got her up like right before 9.
I got too much sleep during the week, buddy.
Apparently, she didn't get that much sleep. Weird, right? So strange. Alright, phones in the bucket if you haven't already. We are going to be looking at 2 Corinthians today, but because it was 2 weeks ago, we're going to look back real fast at 1 Corinthians. Ow. Phone and cold medicine. 1-2 there. Alright, so last week we were looking at 1 Corinthians, and it was a pretty small book, but it all had kind of this one driving message. That the gospel is the answer. So the gospel is the answer to when we start to walk away from God, and the gospel is also the answer to how to direct, how to choose what to do with our lives on a small choice basis, on a large choice basis. The gospel should move us in the right direction. So go back to the gospel. It's refreshing. It's not something you should only hear when you first become a Christian and then just, forget about it, don't worry about it, don't need to talk about it or hear about it. The gospel should be something we're washing ourselves with daily, kind of like toothpaste. All right, so today we're going to move on to
toothpaste.
Sorry?
Wash yourself with toothpaste.
Yes,
Yeah,
wash
like
yourself with toothpaste.
Like facial cleanser.
Well, I realized that most other cleansers, if I said, since you use it every day, most people would be like, no, I don't do that every day. Because I'm Italian, we have to wash all of us every day. Or else you start slipping off of things. It's terrible.
Or a hand soap. Use hand soap every day.
Yep, you could use hand soap every day. I think that's pretty consistent. You don't wash your hands every day? You need to Clorox those game
Out
controllers.
you go. Be gone. See ya.
Alright, so today we're going to be reading through 2 Corinthians. It's entitled The Ministry of Reconciliation, and that is because of why Paul wrote the book. Now, before we get into the why of it, first off, in your Bibles, it is the 3rd book in order that Paul wrote. These blue books are the Pauline letters, meaning the letters that Paul wrote. Overall, though, it is the, what did that make it, 8th book in the New Testament, likely written in 56 AD. Just to give you an idea of what part of the world we are talking about. It's supposed to advance in its own seconds. There we go. We've got here a timeline of Paul's life, so you know where we're talking about, and then we'll go explore on the map where he's at. So he's already gone on his 1st missionary journey. He's gone on his 2nd missionary journey. He's gone on his 3rd, and he's partway through that missionary journey. And down here, he goes through Macedonia, goes south to Greece, and he goes back north to Macedonia. This is where he writes the book of 2 Corinthians, the 2nd time through Macedonia on his way back north. So, the way this breaks down is last week he wrote 1 Corinthians while he was in... Anyone? Anyone?
Foreign.
No. No. He was in Macedonia. But he was in Macedonia the 1st time. So here's how this breaks down.
That is a macaroon.
Yes, macaroon, those delicious coconut cookies. Here we are in Chico, California. There's us. And if we zoom on over to the other part of the world where Paul was at when all this was taking place, we get to see why he was in Macedonia twice and why he wrote a book both times to Corinth. So Corinth is down here at this little red marker. And on his journey, he starts here, goes on down there. And then when he leaves, he heads back up north because he doesn't have money, time, or reason to get a ship. He's going to go back to Macedonia on his way back home. While he does that, he writes a book on the way there. He sends it on ahead of him, sticks around up here, book gets there, they read it. Then he goes down, he visits, he's physically there for a while, hangs out, talks, things happen. Then he heads back up north, and he decides, you know what? I didn't say everything I wanted to say. I don't think I left on the terms I wanted to leave on. I'm going to send him another letter. So he writes another one from Macedonia and sends it backwards while he leaves. This is why. While he was coming towards Greece, towards Corinth, that's the city in the country of Greece, while he was coming towards Corinth, he got news that Corinth was doing some bad things. That as a church, they weren't actually following Christ in all ways. So he wrote 1 Corinthians to say, here's how you should change your behaviors based on the gospel in this area. in this area, in this area, in this area. And so he had like 5 different ways in which to bend your life around the gospel. And they were specific to what Corinth was doing wrong as a church. Then he gets to Corinth to basically see how they took the letter. Did you guys change? Paul's a very upfront kind of guy. He's very to the point, but he's also very fast. He wrote them the letter and then he shows up. And he says, "Did you do it yet?" Like right after he wrote the letter. That's really hard to take. I don't know if you guys have ever been told, by a teacher at school, "You're really not doing too great in this area. I need you to improve in this. Here's some study material. Try and get better at this over, the next few weeks." You ever had that done to you? No teachers ever challenge you. You're failing in this area. You got to try harder. You guys just all brainiacs, or you got bad teachers? I'm not sure what's going on here. A students, so there's never been any room for a teacher to suggest improvement. Oh, okay. All right. Well, generally speaking, if you're not an A student, teachers will occasionally approach you and say, "Hey, you know what? You're not stupid. You're just not doing well in this area. And this one part of the subject is dragging your grade down. So you know what? You're doing great at multiplication. You're doing great at division. You're doing great at all these other kinds of math, but you're doing horrible at fractions. Every time there's a fraction that comes up, you're doing it backwards or whatever. So you got to learn fractions. So you just focus on fractions, then your grades will come up. So here's some extra stuff you can do on fractions." That's the kind of thing a math teacher might say. If it's science, maybe it's chemistry. If it's English, maybe it's punctuation. I don't know. But there would be something, an area where you say, "Change." Now, what if the teacher gave that to you on Friday, and on Monday they say, "Okay, so how you doing? Here's a test on fractions. Let's see how you did." You're like, whoa, that was Friday, man. Like, I've had 2 days. I'm not instantly better at fractions, right? But this is the deal. We're not talking about a subject in school. Paul is actually talking about the way you live your life. He's talking about the way you talk to people, the way you deal with people, the way you treat people, attitudes, all these different parts of life. And he's saying, hey, you can either represent Christ, you can do the things Christ would have you do, or you can just keep messing around.
Or you can learn fractions.
Or fractions, yes. Thank you, Andrew. And so Paul writes some letter. He says, hey, you got to fix the attitude. You got to fix the way you're treating people. You got to fix all these different areas. And then he shows up and he says, how are you guys doing? Well, funny story. They weren't doing so well yet. It wasn't because he didn't give them enough time, though. This is what's so interesting. In 2 Corinthians, here's your little chain of events. He starts the church in Corinth back in chapter 18 of Acts. Then he hears that, things aren't going so well. He writes them the first letter. But their response is, whatever, Paul, when they read the letter. So they get the letter first, and they say, whatever, Paul, we don't like you. You're just like a meanie head. So do you think they're going to change their attitude by the time he shows up? No, they didn't take the letter well. They read his letter that says, change this, change that. And they're like, we hate Paul, throw the letter away. That's their attitude. So when he shows up, it's not a good visit. It is literally called by Paul the painful visit. That's what he calls it. The painful visit. Because Paul shows up and they not only haven't changed, but on top of that, they now have a bad attitude towards Paul. And so Paul has to go around basically going, hey, you're the guy I told to change like this. You're hurting him, and her. You got to change now. Now is your chance. Now. It's now or get out.
And Paul brought the stick. You can see where he hit the people with the stick.
It's a walking stick. It's not for beatings.
Oh, they got marks on them.
No, that's artistic line use.
Those are
That's his arm.
perfectly matched for.
That's his arm. That's his shirt collar.
Oh, look at the top, like right in the center of his face. He got like bean right in the nose.
That's a tear.
Yeah.
That's a tear.
No, that is that. Well, I'm sure they'd be crying after that.
Oh my gosh. All right. Anyways, after the painful visit, Paul leaves, and he goes on to write this second letter. And the letter basically says, guys, I didn't come around to beat you up. You got to know, I don't like coming around and having all these difficult conversations, having all these confrontations. I don't like that. But I did it all in love, and I'm not sorry that it happened. I'm just sorry it had to happen. What he says is, I'm not even sorry if I made you sad. He says, because the sadness I gave you was from the Holy Spirit. And if you felt sadness, let me just clear it out right now in the book. The sadness was God trying to get you to realize that you shouldn't have been doing what you were doing in the first place. And it's not Paul's fault for telling you to stop doing the wrong things and the bad things. Okay, it's your fault for doing those things. That's where your sorrow comes from. The Holy Spirit convicts you, I was just helping out. So, here's the actual contents of the book of 2 Corinthians. The first part has a lot of small sections. He moves really fast through a few different topics. So first off, he just starts with like an opening prayer. It's short, it's sweet. He just kind of prays over them and says, I love you guys in general terms before he even gets into what the book's about. Okay? And then, backstory on why they have a little bit of a disposition against Paul. Why do they not like him in the first place? Well, apparently it wasn't all just because he wrote the first letter that said, you guys got to change because you're messing everything up. That wasn't the start of their dislike of Paul. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. The actual start of them all disliking Paul was that they had these other guys coming around, and they were nothing like Paul. You see, Paul was a poor man who made tents as he traveled to make his living. He didn't take money from the churches he was serving in. He didn't take money from people he had led to Christ. A lot of people did. Other people, they would take donations. Paul took nothing. He paid for himself entirely. So these other teachers would come around, and they would dress rich and look rich and talk big. They would talk about how much they had done and how many miracles they had worked and how impressive they were. And the Corinthians bought it. They bought a hook, line, and sinker. They were a rich city, and they appreciated rich things. So when a rich-looking guy comes around saying, yes, I'm a preacher too, and he's wearing a fancy outfit, and he has all this fancy stuff, they look at him and go, wow, he must be an amazing preacher if he's this successful. Does that make sense? You guys see what's happening there? They're measuring how godly a person is by how many worldly things they've obtained. Now that sounds insane when I say it that way, but from their perspective, if Paul was preaching and preaching and preaching, and all he ever had to show for it was nothingness, poorness, and the other guy's preaching and preaching and preaching, and he has a lot to show for it, in their minds, all that stuff that he accumulates is the measurement. It's the way you tell if he's a good preacher. So they have several of these guys coming around on a regular basis. And so all these different guys all look similar. They're all rich. They're all successful. Paul's the only exception. Paul's poor. Paul's lowly. Paul's humble. So he looks out. What am I trying to say? He looks like an outcast to them. He looks like an outsider. He looks like the weird one among all the missionary preachers. So that's their kind of first dislike of Paul, and it just stacks up with this book that says, hey, you got to change how you're living. So Paul goes on to say, because he knows this is an issue there, he was just there, and now he's left. He goes on to say, this is not at all what Christian leadership should look like. Christian leaders should actually be slaves in appearance. They should look like slaves, and that's a strong word. A strong word for us. It was strong back then. I think it's a little stronger now. But it's a strong word to say look like a slave. What is he saying? He's saying someone who is a leader of Christians, where we would think, that puts you on top, that puts you above. He says what you need to look like, what your life needs to look like, is like you are a servant. Like you are below it.
Did he say slaves in like that illustration, or did he say like the doulos bondservant type thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So in some translations it's slave, in some translations it's servant, in better translations it's bondservant. That's the most literal translation. It doesn't get translated that way often enough though, because the word bondservant is foreign to us now. We're kind of in an age where if I say bondservant, can you tell me what that means? Most of you guys probably couldn't. You might be able to guess.
So it kind of has an important meaning, especially to like this.
Yes, this illustration seems really creepy almost. It seems like a cult if you don't know the meaning of the word bondservant. So the meaning of the word bondservant is that you have gone and served under a master for some time. Maybe you owed him a debt. Maybe you had just been in debt and he said he'd pay off your debt for you. Maybe he was just your boss and that was your job. Okay, so maybe he just paid you on a weekly basis or whatever. So you go and you work for the guy. At some point in time, you've worked off your debt, or your term is done, or maybe he's going to move to another country. And for some reason, the job now seems like, okay, well, it's probably over. You're done. Go look for another job. A bondservant comes in when the job is about to take its normal end, and you say, well, wait a second. this is the best job I've ever had. Now, I know I was just working for you because I owed you money. Or I know I was just working for you because I was dirt poor. Or I know I was just working for you because I needed a job. Whatever reason you were working for him, you say, you're such a good master, I just want to work for you for the rest of my life. I don't ever want to have to look for another job. I don't want to have to ever wonder where my next one's coming from. I just want to always work for you, always. You say that to your boss. And your boss says, okay, I'm going to make you half servant, half part of the family. I'm going to stick a nail through your ear. They take an awl, which is a special, like, sometimes leatherworking, sometimes woodworking tool, and they pierce that through your ear, and it would show you are now a permanent servant. But see, the difference is you were there, you tried things out, you saw how it was, and then you chose to become the permanent servant of someone. That's bondservant. Okay, does that kind of sink in? So when you see, like in the illustration, chains and neck fetters and all that stuff, that's not like Jesus put them in those. That's them following Jesus free and clear, deciding this is the best thing there ever was. I don't want to be able to leave. I want to be here forever. I don't want to ever slip through the cracks. I don't ever want to walk away. I don't ever want to, get stupid for a night and decide to go. I want to be here forever. That's what this illustration is meant to be. Look at who we can follow. Look at who we can serve. And this is the big point Paul makes, is that your job as a leader is not to point to yourself. Your job as a leader is to point to Jesus. That's what Christian leadership should look like. So, yes, a servant, not about status, all about pointing to Jesus. Next up, he starts to get a little confused and a little hurt. You see, one of the complaints he got when he was there was for him to basically get a homework assignment. Hey, Paul, you come around here telling us what to do. Hey, Paul, you write us letters telling us we got to change. Why don't you do something for us, okay? Why don't you go get letters of accreditation? Why don't you go get people who can vouch for your authority to send letters back to us to prove that you're some great apostle, okay? Because as far as we can tell, you're kind of poor, you're kind of, lowly, you're kind of humble. You don't got much to show for your work. So you seem like you're not doing that good of a job. Why don't you go get some other people who can back you up, Paul? Because we just don't want to listen to you anymore. Paul says, guys, that's ludicrous. I've started your church. See, earlier on one of his past missionary journeys, he went through Corinth and he started the church in Corinth. There was no Christians in Corinth until Paul got there. And so he says, guys, I don't need letters of recommendation. I don't need proof. I have every Christian here as proof that I am an effective, God-fearing, God-following missionary. Because I brought you to Christ, I brought you to Christ, I brought you to Christ. He says, you guys are my proof. The proof is written in your hearts. If you are following Christ today, if you love Jesus Christ, it's because I was here X number of years ago. There's your proof. He says it's stupid to ask for proof from the outside because you're asking for proof from someone you don't know to prove someone you do know to you. That's ludicrous. It should be the other way around, but you can't because you already know me. And you know me well. I brought you to Christ. So he says, you are now some new covenant people, and there should be huge changes. He goes on to quote the Old Testament to kind of show what those new covenant rules are, what that kind of person should be. And then he starts contrasting the Old Covenant and the New Covenant to kind of show them what the differences are and why what he brought them is so amazing. Not like Paul is so amazing, but what God gave Paul to bring them is so amazing. So he says, Old Covenant, Old Testament. Here you go. This is how it works. You got God. He wants to deal with Israel, but he can't go direct. They're freaked out by him. Like, literally, he tried. They were freaked out. They said, please no. Please no more. God, never come to us directly ever again. We want middlemen only. So he says, okay, we'll use Moses. He'll be the middleman. So God works through Moses to work with Israel. And it's actually really good. It's glorious. But it's fading, and it's actually ineffective. Because what ends up happening is that the same nation of people will follow God for a generation, and then the next generation they're done. As soon as those people have kids and those kids grow up, the whole country walked away from God. And this just happened over and over and over again. One generation on, one generation off. Sometimes it was worse. Sometimes it was multiple generations off before one of the generations remembered, oh yeah, we should follow God. So he says, the Old Covenant, glorious, but not best. Certainly not perfect. Then he says, but this is what I brought you guys. I brought you the new covenant from the New Testament. It is God still, and he wants to work with everyone, but he's being personal. He says, I want to work with you guys. It's God wanting to work with the Corinthians, but he can't go direct. Why? Because you guys are sinners like I was. Like all of us, we're sinners. So he says he worked through a middleman, Jesus, first off, and then he follows up with the Holy Spirit. These are going to be God's middlemen. They're going to be the ones that interact directly with you guys. And so he says, this one, glorious like the first covenant, but this one is eternal. And it's not just effective, it's transformative. So it's not just effective at making people whole, it actually transforms them into someone whole, so they stay whole. They get to keep hold of all of those blessings from God. They get to keep hold of the Spirit. They get to keep hold of their forgiveness from God. Then he keeps going, and he gets into the last part in this first third of the book. And he starts talking about the paradox of the cross. And this will kind of come up throughout the rest of the book as he continues on. And he says that Jesus is a king. Notice the crown here. He's a king, and he was gloriously exalted. So he's put up in front of everyone. Look how amazing Jesus is. And how was it done? It was done with his death. It was done with his punishment. His death, his punishment, his suffering was his glory, his exaltation. It's such a paradox. It's so backwards to be lifted up high and killed, to be put in front of everyone in glorious death. It's a very backwards set of things. But he says this sets the stage, this sets the tone for how Christianity is meant to work. And so we see that God's salvation was made through Jesus' death. That God's character is a self-giving love. He gives of his own, meaning his son in this case. He gave his own son. And that we have a new crucified form, a cruciform way of life, where we're supposed to imitate the cross. And so Paul says, this is what you see in me that you don't like. I need you to see it for what it is. It's Christ-likeness. It's being like Christ. You look at me and you see someone who's humble, you see someone who's suffering, you see someone who's poor, and you go, oh, ew, gross. And I gotta say, it hasn't changed much. These days, if you're driving around Chico, I mean, maybe people complain about people in other cars. Maybe people complain about, bad driver there, bad driver there. But a lot of times people are complaining about the homeless people out on the street. You ever experienced that driving in a car? Just going down the street and someone's like, they're begging, angry about it. Or, oh man, look at them. Or you guys ever experienced that? Walking down the street and there's someone there and someone comments on how they smell? This is the kind of thing I hear when I'm walking down the street. This is the kind of thing I've seen in other people, and it's so sad. Because what we're talking about is humble people who are suffering and are poverty-stricken. Those are qualities they all have in common with Jesus Christ. Think about that the next time you see a homeless person. Jesus had a lot in common with them when he was here on this earth. And that's not to say all of those things are automatically good in everyone's eyes. That's not to say that, Jesus was like, yay, I'm dirt poor, or, yay, I'm suffering on the cross. That's not what it means. No, it's given meaning by Jesus. So if someone is humble and suffering and poor, that doesn't mean you should look at them and go, hey, good job. Well done. That's great. You're just like Jesus. Way to go. No, you should help them out. What Paul is getting at, he's saying that since I am choosing to be humble, I'm choosing to not fight against suffering, and I'm choosing to live a life of poverty, a life where I don't need much and I don't have much. He says, I'm choosing these things. Then it is something to be commended. It is something to be looked well upon because he's choosing it. Because it's what Jesus went through. It's what Jesus lived out. And he's saying, if you choose this, you're choosing to be like Jesus. You're choosing to be like him as I am choosing to be like him. And he says, this is the proof that I'm here on behalf of Jesus and not on my own behalf. If I was here on my own behalf, would I like being humble? Or do you think I'd like being in charge and loud and important? If he was there for himself, he'd want to be important. He'd want to be in charge. He said, if I was here for myself, do you think I'd put up with suffering? Do you think I'd fight against it? Try not to suffer. He said, yeah, I wouldn't want to suffer if I was here for myself. I think the last one's the most obvious. If he was there for his own personal gain, he would not be choosing a life of poverty. He'd be going to every church he ever started saying, all right, guys, pay up. I got you salvation. What are you going to give me?
$5 per head.
$5 a head. I saved you $5. I saved you $5. He'd be doing that if he was there for his own personal gain. He says, no, none of those are true. I was there for Christ the whole time. That's the proof right there. All right, then he moves on to the next section. This is only 2 chapters long, but it's really important to Paul. And we're just going to zoom in and take a look at how this breaks down. So first off, he brings up the issue. It's kind of almost like the first book where he was going to outline an issue and then outline what needed to change. So here he goes. He's going to outline the issue. The issue was that the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem had a real bad streak of poverty. They had tried out this socialism thing where they pooled all their money as Christians together into one big purse, and then they paid everyone's bills and got everyone food all from like the common pot. So they shared everything in money, and they shared everything in need. And so they just gave and took as needed from the shared pot of money. So purse, pot, bowl. I don't know what they actually sorted in, so you can call it a money chest, whatever. Huh?
Wheelbarrow.
Bank, safe, a barrel, I don't know.
Wheelbarrow.
Hole in the ground. That's a different example. So anyways, in Romans, he writes to the Romans and mentions this. He mentions it in 1 Corinthians at the very end of the book. He's mentioned it to a few other churches too, in person. He would basically go around and say, hey, the church in Jerusalem is dying of poverty. You guys are not. Would you be willing to share with them? Send them some relief money. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to tell you how much to give. I just want to let you know that the need is there. And if you want to help meet the need, go for it. So he shared this all over the place as he traveled as a missionary. And the response was huge. It was enough to save the church in Jerusalem. Huge. I mean, there are people who are just running to give money. That's like the Galatians and the Macedonians. He had just been through those places, and they were super excited at the chance to help out Jerusalem. Why? Because all the missionaries, all the people who were running around the world sharing the gospel, most of them came from Jerusalem. Christianity got its start there. This is where Jesus died on the cross. And so people were excited to be able to help out the mother church. They were excited to be able to help out the first church. You know what I mean? They were excited for that chance to be able to do something for the place where it all started, to be involved with that central hub of the church. And so some people ran for the opportunity and loved the opportunity. But when Paul wrote his letter and said, hey, opportunity coming up, and then he went and visited, and then he left empty-handed from Corinth. And so he writes back this time now in these 2 chapters to say, guys, who gives? Everyone else was super stoked to give. And you guys are like, well, I mean, there's other people giving. I don't need to give. It's okay. And Paul says, okay, it's okay not to give when you can't give. But there's a problem when you can give and you're like, I don't want to give. I have no desire to give. He says there is an actual problem. And it's not just that someone else needs money. That's not the problem. Check this out. Okay, it's not really about the money. They haven't been transformed by the gospel because the gospel is a story of generosity. And if the gospel sinks in and actually gets into your heart, it should cause you to be more generous in all circumstances. Not just with money, but generous in all ways. And yes, when money does come up, then generosity will cover money, and you'll be generous with your money. But he says you guys should be generous in all ways because the gospel is about generosity. So knowing that they are money obsessed in this city, that because they're a rich city, they are a bit obsessed with money, he takes the gospel now and he spins it into a metaphor or analogy based on finance. He's going to use monetary terms now to describe the gospel to them. So listen, he says, for you know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus the Messiah, that even though he was rich, for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. Okay, so he's talking about what Jesus does, and he's using these monetary terms. And basically what he says was, Jesus started up in heaven, and he had all honor and power, and he's now kind of equating that to wealth. He's saying that when Jesus was in heaven, he had all power, he had all honor, he had everything. He was in his fullness of the Godhead. He was there in his glory. Okay, he had everything at his disposal. And so he says that was like for Jesus being rich. Then he comes to earth, and he's not talking about money. He's talking about all the circumstances he was put into that were everything but heaven. Okay, they were terrible compared to heaven. And he says, in that sense, it was like Jesus became poor. It was like a rich man giving up his wealth. Jesus gave up his glory to come to earth as a human. And he says he did this to take you guys from a state of sin, which he's likening to poverty, and send you into a state of richness, or a place where you're under God's grace. So he says Jesus left glory so you could have grace. But instead of just saying it that way, he uses money trainers. Because he's thinking maybe the money stuff will sink in. Maybe they'll get it. Jesus gave up what he had to give you what you now have. Hint, 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 hint. There's poor people who need your help. Hint, hint. Trying to get them to realize this isn't about the money. It's about you guys responding to the gospel. If you take the generosity of Jesus Christ, it should cause you to want to give generously in any circumstance, be it money from your pocket, the coat off your back, the spare room in your house. Whatever you've got, he says, be generous with it. I don't know what you've got, but give what you've got. Then he goes on to the last section, last part of the book, Paul's final challenge. He's going to take on those rich, famous, self-promoting super apostles head on. This is what Paul kind of calls them, super apostles. It's in 11 and 12. Because he knows this is the main source of the conflict. These guys are not just self-promoting, they're also bad teachers. And so while they're there promoting themselves and getting rich and taking money from the Corinthians, they're also teaching them stupid things, which is getting them to be confused about what's important, which is keeping them from making the changes that Paul was telling them they needed to make. Keeping them from fixing their church, keeping them from following God according to the gospel. They were going to start following God according to these false apostles, and that wasn't going to work out so well. So Paul says, hey, you know what? They're so worried about credentials. They're so worried about, who's done what and who's done the biggest miracle. He says, let's have a contest, okay? Because I know I would win. And then he's going to finish with a really great finish. He says, all right, so they say they're Jewish Bible experts. That's what they say. They claim to be Bible experts, born Jews. They know what they're talking about. Paul says, hey, you know what? I'm a Pharisee. You know what our final quiz is? Memorize the Bible. That's the final quiz. I did that, said Paul. I was a Pharisee. I've been there. I memorized it. They want to claim to be a Bible expert? Test me. I could cite you any passage there is. Okay, then he says, hey, you know what? They claim that they're knowledgeable about Jesus. We're Jews, we're from Israel, we were there when Jesus was around. He's like, yeah, okay, that's great. I spent actual time with the risen Jesus. Jesus in his glory, when he could just go anywhere, do anything, tell you all this stuff because it already happened. He doesn't have to keep secrets anymore. In fact, I've actually had visions of Jesus, heavenly throne room, where he's taught me stuff straight from heaven. So, I know some stuff about Jesus. And then they ask for lots of money. Wait, is that a positive? See, this is the weird one to me. Corinthians looked at the super apostles and saw how much money they had and thought that was a positive thing. But how did they get their money? Think about it. They didn't have jobs. They didn't do anything. They got all their money from other churches where they didn't come from. They were like traveling missionaries asking for a paycheck when they came to town. Does that make sense? These aren't pastors who are there every single week working. These aren't the guys who are going to funerals and hospital beds and praying with people. These aren't the people who are cleaning up the church building. These are traveling missionaries who show up for a weekend, preach, and leave, and they're saying, we want a paycheck. Do you guys kind of see how that works out? Okay, so somehow the Corinthians are seeing this in the light of they are rich in the process, so therefore it's a positive. Paul says that's not really a positive. So then he compares, he says, I've given my entire life to the mission of Jesus. I don't do anything else. I'm just a missionary. So you'd think I would need to get a paycheck from being a missionary. But he says, no, that's not the case. I've never asked for money. In fact, I've never taken any money. In fact, I've worked for all my money. While I was a missionary, I was holding down a second job. I make tents on the side. That's how I pay for my journeys. That's how I pay for my trips. I've been doing it all simultaneously without asking for money. And then he says this, and this is so great. He says, but none of this matters. He's like, I totally beat you, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who wins the contest, because instead, he says, rather than bragging about any of these things, no Christian should ever brag about any of these things, Paul says. Doesn't matter which side of the checklist you're on. He says, you should only brag about what? Yeah. What's it say? Brag about my... Come on, guys. You gotta wake up here. Come on! What does it say? Say it again. Weakness. Say it. You can say it. I've heard you speak. You can do it. Weekends. No.
Brag about my weekends.
Nope. It is a magic place, yeah. He says he wants to brag about his weakness. Alright, guys. Think through this. Why would anyone brag about how weak they are? I can't even think of like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old who's like, yeah, I'm really weak. I'm way weaker than you. I've never heard that happen. I've heard 5-year-olds who are like, I'm really strong. I'm way stronger than you. Like, that's what I hear. Who brags about weakness? Why? Why?
I see where this is full circle. We're going full circle here because Paul is going to say that he's weak to show how great God is. He's a weak guy to do such great things.
Yeah. That's it.
God.
Why'd you use your sarcastic voice?
I'm going full circle.
How is that full circle?
We just talked about it. We went a circle. Full circle.
When did we talk about it?
Like just a second ago. Remember the chains around the neck?
Well, it wasn't brought up then. That's being a servant. He's choosing to be humble.
We're pointing to Jesus. So this is.
Weakness was never mentioned.
Well, yeah, but this is like, it's like a way of doing that. Full circle.
All right, we'll go with full circle. It seems good enough to me. So yeah, this is the verse. Check it out. It says, "Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect through weakness." So Paul quotes Jesus here in his writing as he writes chapter 12, verse 9. He's quoting Jesus, and basically what Paul is saying is the weakness that Paul has, the weakness that you have, the weakness that I, Daniel, have. Okay, that weakness is God's opportunity. God's opportunity. So if you are very strong and self-sufficient and you can do everything on your own, you're super smart and you never fail and you're great and awesome and fantastic, and God goes, wow, there's not that much opportunity there. Very little room for me to come in and help you. And so God can help you. But the amount he helps you is only going to be proportional to how much you let him help you. And so God looks for weak people because they have a lot of room for help. A lot of room for help. God can come in and bring them all the way up to 100%, and then all of a sudden, you notice the difference. When someone who's down at 10 goes up to 100, it looks drastic. It's crazy. It's really exciting. It's weird. It's astounding. It's confusing. And God says, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the weak guy so that when I let him win, when I cause him to succeed, when I cause him to triumph, everyone goes, holy cow, that's a story we're going to be telling for the next few thousand years. You guys remember David? Do you remember that story? You have an army versus an army. One man walks out. And the challenge is, if you can beat that man, the entire other country will be your servants. The enemy will become your slaves. Just beat one man. That's all you have to do. Alright, now, I don't care how scary the other guy is. If you have to go out there and beat one man, you go out there and you beat one man. But you're probably going to lose unless God's on your side. So here's the question. Do you remember the story of David and Goliath? Was God on Israel's side? The answer is yes. So do you think any one of those guys could have walked out there with God on their side and beat Goliath? Think about it. Couldn't any of them have walked out there with God on their side and beat Goliath? Think about it. If God was on their side, yes. Yes, of course. Obviously, because God was on their side. That's all you needed to win the battle. So why David? just covered this. Please use your noggins. You can do this. This is full circle. Okay, here we go. Why David? Because he's the weak one. He's the guy that Dad said you're too small to go to the fight. He's the one that Dad said you're too small to go to war. You gotta stay home and watch the sheep. You can't go fight. You're too little. That's the one that God says, ooh, 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 I pick him. I want him to do it. I want the one that's too little. See, everybody else who goes and beats Goliath, you know what happened? Just be like, oh, yeah, Jim did it. Jim's great. Everybody loves Jim. Jim, man, he's great at sword fighting. That's why he beat Goliath. David beats Goliath? It's interesting. David knows he beat Goliath with God's strength. Some people noticed that David beat Goliath with God's strength. A lot of people, you know what they said? Oh yeah, David, he's a great guy. I love David. David's fantastic. Have you seen what David can do? David's amazing. That's what most people did. And so God has to try so hard to get it past our thick skulls. When someone succeeds with his power, then it was because of his power. So often when someone succeeds with the power of God, fueling them, using them, empowering them, we just go ahead and say, good job, you. You were great. It's not God. God didn't do anything. You're just amazing. So many times when I go downstairs and I preach in front of the adults, I get people coming up afterwards, way to go, Daniel, you were great. I'm like, no, shut up. That's wrong. Liar. That's what I say. It's not exactly what I
Great with
say.
the kids too.
It's not exactly what I say. I say, isn't God great? I'm so glad he got to use me tonight or this morning or whatever. Why do I say that? 2 reasons. It's to remind them, I'm a human. I'm broken and flawed and messed up and I make mistakes. And then secondly, it's to remind me, I'm a human. I'm broken and flawed and messed up and I make mistakes. And the only thing good out of me teaching any time is whatever God gets a chance to say through me. Everything else I say that I come up with, everything else that I say that's me, it's garbage. I don't even care if you like it. If it didn't come from God, it's worthless. And that's the truth. Sometimes the hardest thing as a teacher is to get out of your own way, to just step aside and let God actually speak through you. To actually go to the Holy Spirit in advance and say, God, use me. Use me. I don't want to say the things I'm thinking. I want to say the things you're thinking. That's the hardest thing as a teacher. And it's not just in preaching. See, Paul, he's a preacher. Me, I'm a preacher. So, yeah, that's my example. But for you guys, you have your own life. What are you guys good at? It might not be preaching. That's okay. You can pick something else. What are you good at? Is there anything where people congratulate you? Wow, that was great. That was amazing. Or maybe a little less. And you're like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. Anything like that? What do you have in your life?
Well, perfect students.
Oh yeah, that's right. None of you guys have ever had a teacher try and help you out in a subject because you're all just amazing all the time. So good job on that. Congratulations. 8 students. If you missed that joke earlier, I apologize. You should listen better. Anybody, you guys are all horrible at everything? Is that what I'm getting here? No one is good at a single thing? Legos! Hey, sweet. We got Legos. We're going to set up a Lego table in here in the Dream High room.
Oh, heck yes.
To play with Legos. Yeah. Although, I need your guys' help. We need to come up with a fitting and very efficient punishment for anyone who loses Legos on the floor.
We have the Lego shoes.
Like a shoe that's pre-filled with Legos.
Yeah.
Oh.
You can make it like open-toed slippers or something. And then you can just like embed them inside of it.
That is evil. That's the point. If you lose Legos on the floor, serious punishment. Because I was told if I set up a Lego table here, there's going to be people taking Legos and just throwing them at people. Ethan was the one who warned me that this would happen, though.
Wow.
So,
Because he knew he would do it.
Yeah. He was trying
So
to
this
it's like
is-
the werewolf thing where he tries to like stop you before before he has a
and
chance
then
to.
he's the only one I trust. Oh, he's good. Okay, so my point is we need to come up with a fitting punishment so that no one would be willing to throw a Lego across the room because they know what would happen to them.
Yeah.
Firing squad of Legos.
We have like a U-shaped cylinder, so like every time they throw it, we just like catch it and it whips it right back at them.
I was thinking like we just keep 5 gallons of ice cream in there and we force feed them ice cream. Brain freeze and a stomachache.
Ooh.
Serious punishment right
If they're
there.
lactose intolerant.
Oh, oh, that's destructive. Yeah, we should definitely pick a good flavor though, like black licorice or something.
Like malted, like caramel or something.
I love malted. Malted anything's good.
I'm sorry. Sorry for loss.
There's an ice cream at what's the pharmacy that does ice cream?
Right, Abe.
Rite Aid, yeah. There's an ice cream at Rite Aid called Medieval Madness.
Yep.
It has the little malt balls in it.
Was it malt balls in it?
Oh wait, am I thinking of the wrong one? Oh, I'm thinking of the wrong. That's the one with little chocolate chips in it. It's got malted in the name probably, but there's one with malted milk balls and they're really good. The
Yeah.
little tiny micro ones. Badoo. I think we're done. So last thing, he gives them a sobering warning in the last chapter. He says basically you guys need to check yourselves because everything that we're covering right now in this whole book, everything we're talking about, all the pieces of this, these are all things, the things in the first book, the things in this second book, they're all things that come from heart problems. All of them. They're all from, are you following Christ at all? Like, that's what all these come from. This isn't just like one or two things wrong in your guys' church. When I go to other churches, there's one or two things wrong. Corinth, guys, you have a list. You have a list. And this should not be happening. It should not be happening. If you're all truly trying to follow Christ, you should not have this giant list of things that are wrong in the whole church body. That shouldn't be happening. So you guys need to double check. Are you really committed to following Christ or not? Because if I come to you and I say following Christ should look like this, you should want to change. You should want to change. And if you're more affronted at the idea of what following Christ looks like than you are affronted at your own behavior, then you really have to question whether or not you're following Christ right now. He just says, you got to check yourself. I can't see your hearts. Christ can. You can try. You really do have a chance to look at what you're thinking, what you're feeling on the inside. Paul says, I can only judge by your actions. Your actions are telling me it's not good. It's really not good. And then there's the recap. Here we go. Recap time. Basically, God values humility and weakness because his love and power were made known through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And that this new style of life should become our own life. And it won't happen overnight. It'll be transformation style, slowly through the Holy Spirit. This is kind of the gist of the whole book. All right, so not a very happy book, but neither was the first one. There are, however, if you read the book, lots of happy things in it. Lots of sweet, sweet nuggets. 6 and 7, I think, are probably some of my favorites. Go check out chapter 6 and 7. There are some amazing things that Paul writes in 2 Corinthians. I like 1 Corinthians, don't get me wrong, but I think I like 2 Corinthians better. Despite the overall tone being very down, there are beautiful, beautiful passages. Sometimes it's just half a chapter, but beautiful nonetheless. And they describe what it looks like to be following Christ. They describe what it looks like to do the right thing, to have the right heart. And so even though, yes, it is a slightly negative book, those sections are very positive. Because they're not saying what you're doing wrong, they're saying this is what it should look like. This is what you guys should be striving for. This is what Christianity should be about. Those sections are very beautiful. And they're all throughout the book. It's not just in one part. There's some bigger sections in 6 and 7. So read through 2 Corinthians. I think you'll find there are so many beautiful parts. It doesn't leave you downcast. It doesn't leave you in a negative place when you're done reading the book. My summary may have because it's topical and we're just dealing with basically what the problem for why the book was written. But the overall message, God wants us to be humble. The things of pride are not things of God. If you meet a super proud, impressive, flashy Christian, you've met a Christian who's missed the point. They're a Christian who's doing things for themselves. They're a Christian who's not doing things for Jesus. And so do not value rich things. Do not value pomp and circumstance and big, giant church buildings and impressive this and impressive that. He says, none of that matters. None of that's important. What's important is being close to Christ. And when you're really close, you start to live your life like he did. You start to live your life in poverty. You start to be humble. You start to suffer. Because people don't get along with really, really Christ-like people unless they're really, really Christ-like too. And most of the world is not. So the more Christ-like you become, the further away from the world you'll be. the less like the world you'll be, and the more you'll suffer for it. That is actually what following Christ really looks like when you start to get truly close to Christ. Humble, suffering, poor people. Doesn't that sound great? Doesn't that sound attractive? Well, that's kind of the point. If it doesn't sound attractive to you now, then you haven't gotten close enough to Jesus to value the things that he values. But as you get close to him and you value what he values, you value spiritual things. You value heavenly things. You value things that he cares about. People. Then suddenly all the other things don't seem to matter as much. You see, what is poverty? Poverty is the lack of money. And so if you're following Jesus and you don't care about money anymore, does poverty sound bad? Think about that for a second. If you truly don't care about money, what is there wrong with poverty?
We don't get money.
But you don't care about money. So what's wrong with poverty? There's nothing wrong with it if you don't care about money. What about suffering? Suffering in this life, Paul tells us elsewhere, produces good things for us permanently in our character, and it produces good things in heaven waiting for us in eternity. So suffering in this life produces good things for a Christian, oddly enough. And so the question is, if you become close to Christ and you stop caring about this life and you start caring about the next life in heaven, does suffering in this life really matter?
Everybody should be able to know.
Why are you saying these things? It has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, we've been suffering.
No, that's suffrage.
Gotcha.
Suffrage. Completely different. Has no correlation here. So thank you for bringing it up. No! Obviously you won't be caring about suffering if suffering doesn't matter to you because you are putting all of your eggs in the heavenly basket. You are caring only about heavenly things. Suffering in this life won't matter so much. And then the last one, you got poverty, you've got suffering, you've got, anyone? What was the third one? Starts with an H. Humble. Humble kind of puts all of them together. Humble means I am lower than other people. I am a servant. I am a servant. I am lowly. Okay, so here's the big question. If you're following Jesus Christ, do you think it's a positive or a negative to be a servant to other people? Do you think it's a positive or negative to be lowly? He says positive. The Bible tells us it is. I've experienced that it is. If you haven't experienced it yet, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe until you try it. That being under people, showing them that you'll care for them, showing them that you'll serve them, showing them that you care more about them than yourself is a good thing. And believe it or not, it's rewarding. It actually feels good while you're doing it, which is just mind-blowing. That being lowly and serving people and doing work for nothing makes you feel good. But it does. You know you're serving God in the process. You know you're serving other people and showing them love. That feels amazing. To know you're pleasing God and you're helping other people, there's few things on this earth that feel better than that. And God says when you're doing it for Him, if you're actually doing it for Him, that's your motivation. He says you're storing up treasures in heaven. And so all three of these things, although they seem bad on the surface, they sound not good. I gotta tell you, that's only based on a worldly opinion. Based on a Christ-like opinion, they're the best things there are. Poverty, suffering, healing. Anyways, that's it. If those don't seem good to you yet, continue to grow close to Christ, and I promise it will happen on its own. You will start to prize those things the same way Jesus does. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this chance to look into your word, for this chance to see one more thing that Paul has written. And as we continue to work through the writings of Paul, Lord, I just ask that you would open these books to us. Just make them abundantly clear. Help us to not only understand Paul's interesting writing style, but to really see your message in his writing. To see what you have to say, God. Because Paul was an amazing man, but Lord, we're more interested in your words. And so through all this, we get to see your message, God, and we are so thankful for that. Help us to prize those three things, Lord, to really strive to have those be the great ideals in our heart. to throw aside worldly gain, to throw aside worldly things, to get rid of worldly opinions, Lord, and just have your opinion. Excuse me. To put you first, God, and to put people just second to that. We ask all these things in your name, Jesus. I was only just barely holding it together for that second. Okay. Anyways, that is it for today. I love you guys. Sorry I was a little sleepy, but you know, you were a little sleepy. It's just that's all there is. I can only bounce my energy off of so many things. If you have not had your 2 half donut pieces or your donut whole, you can go grab those now. Feel free.
Or I thought it was and.
Sorry, that's right. Yes, both. You get a donut whole and two donut halves.
Where they get one tiny piece of donut or 2 big pieces of donut.
No, that's not what it means. It's a tiny piece and 2 big pieces.
Daniel.
Mhm.
Phone's bucket.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, good. You did put one in there. I thought it was only his.
But I do have that. It is his.
What was this one? All right, you win. Good job.
Mine's the small one.
Oh, thank you. Just burp gone wrong. Got into my windpipe.
You have little plates. You need a little plate.
Nah, too much family stuff, sadly. I think I'm gonna send out one right now about next week, though. Unless there's something happening, like a birthday. Hey, Andrew, can you sit up for me if there's a day this week? Do you know, like the new schedule and life work schedule?
I see. Life works Tuesday. I work Monday. Friday, Saturday.
Anyone working Thursday?
No, I think there's
Thursday's okay? Can we do some Thursday night, maybe? I was thinking to leave your meetings here, so we could play some games, like a trading game. Autumn really wanted to play that. And then maybe one of those CD phone games.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do the Thursday night.
Oh, Jacob's thing?
Yeah. So we probably have to step.
Okay, okay.
Unless we do early in the afternoon, but I don't know.
Work schedule right now for a while.
Yeah.
When does Jacob's thing go?
I think it's 6 to 9. It's like after the play.
That makes sense. It's like most of the week. Okay. I'll keep thinking. Where's one doing soon?
Anything like
It's tight, and then you work there. Alright, well, I'll talk to Elijah and see if he has time for me to speak to us and they'd like to stay fun. I was thinking if we had the time, we might even do like stick around after and do a viewing party for like 2 hours.
yeah.
Oh, that's true. You never know what's going on. Yeah. We have a chance to make it get all weird. Well, if we can get out enough by then, when does I think it was New Year's. Is that? Yeah. I think so. So maybe by the time we have a meeting, it'll be out long enough we can find like a meeting for driving.
How many drugs does Sherlock consume in this episode?
I'm less concerned with that because even with Jeremiah now, we're all adults. It's more sex scenes and nudity. That's what kills me. Yeah, basically. That's kind of what it comes down to. There's always the chance too that some murder victim will be back. You just never know. You never know.
Because they can.
Because they can. That's like how.
You didn't say we couldn't do it, so I thought that was a green light.
But yeah, they do this. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'll let you know. Yeah, I'll ask Elijah about Thursday, and maybe that'll be it.